Middle of the country, but not middle of the road opinions. It's the podcast dedicated to sports in the air capital of the world.
I'm going to Wichita.
Wichita, Kansas, and beyond. With Tommy Castor and Weston Mills, this is Keeper of the Games.
Welcome to another episode of Keeper of the Games. We are the wildly underqualified, yet mildly entertaining podcast that is all about sports in the air capital of Wichita, Kansas, and beyond. Weston Mills is here. I'm Tommy Castor, back for another episode. Weston, we are getting closer and closer to Christmas. The holiday season is in full swing. Do you feel the spirit? Are you there? Are you there by now?
You know, I am. I really do love Christmas. It's kind of a weird year, though, right? I mean, I guess that's the understatement of the podcast. But it's just, I don't know. It feels like, how did we get here? How are we at Christmas already? And maybe, I don't know, maybe we say that every year anyways. But boy, it just felt like we were going into lockdowns like 3 weeks ago. Yet at the same time, doesn't that kind of feel like an eternity ago? It's been, I don't know, it's been quite a while, but I love Christmas. I'm big into the season. Haven't got the lights up on the house yet, which if I don't get them up quickly at what point do you just say, well, they're not going up this year. I'm not putting them up for, a week and a half's worth of looking, but I'm hoping either tomorrow night or potentially this weekend.
You could always be like my next door neighbor, and they're the ones that do the lights that they put in their yard that point up at the house. And they rotate the different like lights shining on the house, which is kind of, I think that's kind of the lazy way to do it. But you could, it's an easy way to do it too. So if you're looking for a solution, that could be it right there.
Frankly, I kind of like that. And I may have to look into that because, listen, I just want to spread the Christmas cheer. And if that, if plugging in 2 lights in the front yard help do that and makes me feel like I'm contributing, then I think that's a win-win.
Also, can you believe it? We are getting close to being on the air with this podcast for 1 year. I mean, we're still a little bit short. I think we started in late January of 2020, but we're getting closer and closer to that 1 year mark.
Yeah, this might be the best podcast that has ever launched during the middle of sports being shut down by a pandemic. I mean, can we say that? I think that's maybe a fair statement.
I like that. Our timing has been pretty poor. We've never been known for our timing as far as launching a sports podcast. And speaking of the holiday season coming up, and speaking of the fact that we're getting closer to 1 year on the air, we've got a huge jam-packed show for next week. We're going to talk a lot more about it at the very tail end of the program. But that's kind of my tease for you to stick around towards the very end of the show as we tell you about what we have coming up, our holiday extravaganza to wrap up the year 2020 with Keeper of the Games. Also want to remind you to hit subscribe. That way, anytime we have a brand new episode of the podcast, you will get notified. It's the best way to know that we have new episodes that they've dropped, that they're ready for you to listen. And you can find us on all major podcast platforms, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, and all the other major ones. You can find us right there. Of course, our website is cogsports.com. Make sure to check us out there. You can watch full episodes on YouTube and Facebook by searching for Keeper of the Games. And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at CogPod. That's at KOG Pod. All right, Weston, the last few weeks on the show, we've obviously talked about the Kansas City Chiefs, but they have not led off the show in a while now. We felt like it was a good idea to kick off the show by talking about the Kansas City Chiefs as they won in a squeaker. I know it's weird to say that, against the Denver Broncos at home on Sunday Night Football on Sunday. I think both you and we obviously picked a blowout. Didn't really happen that way, as the Chiefs really had a hard time scoring in the red zone all night long. There were some weird things that happened during the course of the game also. But Weston, the Chiefs now stand at 11-1 with that win on the season. How do you assess that Sunday Night Football win against the Broncos?
It's, it was ugly, of course, but a win's a win. And that's, the mark of a great football team is finding a way to win those games. And it was, while the score was close, there was never a point where I honestly felt like the game was in question. Even coming down to that last drive when you give the ball to Drew Lock with a chance to win, I didn't actually think that there was a chance that he could pull that off. And it kind of felt like one of those games where you look at the box score and it's like, 22-16. It was all these field goals, didn't quite capitalize in the red zone, but it kind of is one of those things where I'm a big believer in law of averages, and the rate at which the Chiefs hit on some of these big plays, we were bound to have a game where 1, 2, 3 of them just didn't connect, right? So obviously, what I'm sure we talk about the Tyreek Hill catch, no catch in the end zone. Then obviously the Tyreek Hill long deep ball where he backflipped into the end zone and there was a holding. But then if you remember, also there was a pass down the left side of the field to McCole Hardman that had Pat hit that in stride. He's gone. That's another 6. And it just kind of felt like it was one of those games where something had to give eventually with the rate we hit on these big plays, on these deep balls. Eventually they're not going to connect. And I just kind of think law of averages caught up, and you still just feel happy that you won that game and kept the spot in the AFC, where we're now tied with the Steelers record wise, but they own the tiebreaker. So, but puts us in a much better position at the end of the season to snag that 1 seed.
Yeah, and I agree with you. There were so many different, just bizarre plays that happened over the course of that game. The one that everybody talks about, and you referenced it, is the catch, no catch with Tyreek. And, he got up disappointed, acted like he hadn't made the catch, and then Andy never challenged it. And when you're watching the replay at home, you're yelling at the TV, like, why do you not challenge that? But I think you also have to recognize that when you're on the field, it's kind of bang, bang. And you're looking up at the Jumbotron, right? And I'm sure that they've got people that are calling in, their review coordinators and things like that. But, it just happened so quickly. And then all of a sudden the Chiefs were punting and there was no chance to challenge it. And my thought with that, I was obviously frustrated about that at the time. I just kept thinking, man, if we lose, it's going to come back to that. Like, that will be the question, that everybody's going to ask Andy Reid. Luckily, it didn't happen that way. But, I don't know if I've ever seen a receiver have such a great game without actually scoring a touchdown than Tyreek Hill did on Sunday night. And you referenced both of those situations. But no, it was one of those games where I don't think you walk away from it being like, yeah, like that was a really, really good win for Kansas City. But the fact remains that it's a division opponent. You're playing at home on Sunday Night Football. There's a lot of pressure on there, and you're trying to keep pace with the number 1 seed in the AFC. So, a lot of pressure going on there. And like you mentioned, a win is a win. And the Chiefs escaped 22-16 against the Broncos. I also think I want to give credit where credit is due. And I'm not the only one that thinks this. The Sunday Night Football crew thought so too, because they interviewed him after the game. Travis Kelce had a phenomenal football game. And, the games where it's both Tyreek and Travis, the Chiefs are going to run away with the game every time. But the good thing is you don't need both of them. You need one of them. And It was Travis Kelce on Sunday night. He had 8 catches for 136 yards, 1 touchdown. I mean, he still looked absolutely dynamic on the field for Kansas City. And it's a good thing the Chiefs had him.
And we talked about last week, I said, I think the Chiefs are at a point where they're kind of man-proof and you have to play zone. But that's kind of the problem with playing the zone, is that we have one of the best zone busters in Travis Kelce, locking down the middle of the field and sitting down in those spots to be able to kind of eat up space where it's needed to be. So you kind of have to pick your poison. Travis Kelce, I'm looking at some numbers right here, because I've just this is a narrative I had built in my head and I wanted to see if I was vindicated. He kind of owns the Denver Broncos. In 13 games, he's got 83 receptions for 1,115 yards and 5 touchdowns against the Broncos in his career. So pretty good. I bet if you look, honestly, even though I kind of built this narrative in my head, I bet if you look against AFC West opponents altogether, I bet his numbers are pretty good. But for whatever reason, I just feel like Travis Kelce just always shows up against the Broncos, and they just can't stop him.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I think that, while Travis Kelce is not going to be mentioned in MVP talk, which he might be in the conversation, which he won't win the MVP, but he definitely does need to be in consideration for other awards like Offensive Player of the Year, things like that. I mean, he only trails DK Metcalf as far as total receiving yards by 5. That's it. And in the NFL.
I've seen his name suggested a few different times by some prominent, NFL media folks for offensive player of the year. So I think that is very much in consideration. I mean, he's putting up really career type numbers this year. I mean, he's got 82 receptions already through 12. He had 97 all of last year, 1,114 yards. He had 1,229 yards all of last year. He's already got 8 touchdowns, which is 2 off of his career high. Averaging 92 yards a game, which the highest he's ever averaged is 83 yards a game. So I think Travis Kelce absolutely needs to be considered, and especially considering, he's doing this as probably not the number one guy on the Chiefs offense, which is insane to think about. I mean, he's the number 2, and yet he's still putting up those numbers, sharing a target load, a workload with Tyreek Hill, and then of course a little bit of the running game. So just incredible season so far from Travis Kelce.
Speaking of the running game, pretty good effort by Le'Veon Bell and Darrell Williams on Sunday. Now, I do have to say I started Clyde Edwards-Helaire in 3 of my fantasy lineups. Unfortunately, I don't think I have him, and I'm facing you in that league. And I think I am beating you, by the way, in that league.
I think so too.
I think we're waiting for the Dallas game tonight for that. But anyway, the bottom line though is that the running game, even without CEH, with Le'Veon Bell and Darrell Williams, looked pretty good. I mean, they were able to rush for over 100 yards on the ground. And that really seemed to be a little bit more of a balanced offensive effort for Kansas City on Sunday night than what we've seen really be pass heavy over the last several weeks.
And the numbers didn't really will probably not show up for Le'Veon Bell, but I thought this was his best game as a Chief. I thought he looked really good running the ball. I can't remember. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I do remember his yards per carry was 3.8, which is, it doesn't blow you away, but that's all the Chiefs need out of a running back, is someone to come in and get consistent yards. And that's one thing he's been good at his whole career, is he's got that patient ability where, at times, honestly, I think that does cost him from maybe making the explosive run, but he always finds a way to get 2, 3, 4 yards because he is so patient, waits for that run game to develop, and then hits the hole when he has to. So I think he was really good. And obviously we talked about, you just talked about Darrell Williams had a couple of big runs, but it's going to be so key, especially as the weather gets cold and it's a little bit harder to throw that ball around, that those 3 get the run game going. And even though we haven't seen the numbers, I'm personally not real worried about it. So, I think there's a lot to be positive about from this game, even though it was just squeaking away. But, ultimately a win is a win, and we're, right there as 1B, I guess you'll say, in the playoff race. So, and really with the Steelers having we've got a couple tough games coming up in Miami and New Orleans, but Pittsburgh's got Buffalo, and I'm drawing a blank on the other one, but one more tough.
Don't they play Cleveland again? Oh,
that'd be nice. I hope that's
they play Cleveland again. Yeah.
Well, either way, I'm certainly, I think that they'll lose in Buffalo. And I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but for our listeners who maybe not quite sure exactly how this breaks down. So the Steelers are at 11-1, Kansas City's 11-1. The tiebreaker typically is head-to-head. We have not played the Steelers, obviously. So the next tiebreaker goes to record within the division. We lost against the Raiders, who are an AFC team. Steelers lost to Washington yesterday, who are an NFC team. So really, if things were to finish out the season like that, we would end up the 2 seed because they'd have that tiebreaker. But they do have a couple tough AFC games coming up.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised to see Pittsburgh drop another game between now and the end of the year. Like you mentioned, they're on the road this Sunday night against Buffalo. They take on the Bengals on the road. Bengals are without Joe Burrow and Joe Mixon right now, so that should be a win for Pittsburgh. But then they finish at home against the Colts. And the Colts are surprisingly pretty good this year.
Yeah.
And then their final game is on the road, January 3rd against Cleveland is where they wrap up the season. And Cleveland is really good this year as well. So it's a tough 3 out of 4 game stretch for Pittsburgh, down the stretch. So, we'll see what ends up happening with that. But, the Chiefs really did their part. Obviously, you need to get wins where you can, and they were able to do that on Sunday. And obviously, it helped that Washington beat Pittsburgh on what was it, Monday afternoon football when that ended up happening.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that big victory that the Washington football team had. And Alex Smith, by the way, leading the Washington football team to that big win on the road in Pittsburgh. Before we move away from Kansas City, I do want to talk about the defense a little bit, because we've talked quite a bit about Travis Kelce and the running game. And obviously, what more can you say about Patrick Mahomes? Another more than solid start for Patrick. But defensively, I thought that was overall one of the better efforts that we've seen from the Chiefs defense throughout the course of the season. Now, obviously, they're up against Drew Lock, who's not, the stud quarterback by any means. But I really thought that there were a couple of players that stood out. I mean, the first thing you're going to say is Tyrann Mathieu and 2 interceptions, and he had that one to seal the game, against Drew Lock there late. But then also a guy that I think is pretty divisive around Chiefs Kingdom, and I'm a huge fan of, and I don't know if you are, but I certainly am, and that's Daniel Sorensen. He had a really good game as well for Kansas City. I know that there are a lot of Chiefs fans out there that don't like him. They don't understand why he plays so much, and he does get burned from time to time, especially when, he's playing man coverage, but he does seem to come up with big plays, and he's always around the football. He's kind of a ball hawk. He had a great game too. So I would say that both Tyrann Mathieu and Daniel Sorensen really led the Chiefs defense on Sunday.
Tommy, thank you for introducing me, giving me an avenue to talk about Dirty Dan on this podcast, because I am a huge Daniel Sorensen fan. And personally, look, you're right. He's got some limitations from a physical ability standpoint, but I think the Chiefs fans who don't appreciate Dirty Dan, I think I'm going to call them out. I truly think you're an uneducated fan if that's the case, because the things he does, and I mean, he has the nickname Dirty Dan for a reason, right? He's going to do all the dirty work. He will set that edge, which is not sexy. It's not glorious. There's not a lot of people that are yelling, "Oh, Daniel Sorensen, way to set the edge," right, when, Damian Wilson or Tyrann Mathieu comes down and then makes the play because Daniel Sorensen set the edge. He does that stuff consistently. And then you're right. The part that everybody does love about him, right, is that guy's just got a nose for the football. He's just got a knack for making big plays when the time is right. So I think he's going to be one of those people that is going to, I don't know, unsung hero, I guess is kind of the word, but I feel like kind of every one of these great teams, right, always has a player that the fan base loves that is just not even probably known at all. His name's probably not hardly recognized outside of Kansas City one bit. But in Kansas City, when you watch those games in and out, you just recognize what he does and what he brings to a team. I said he does the dirty work, but I think he's also kind of the glue guy, right? Like, you got to have a glue guy, a guy that's, going to kind of step up, bring that energy. And it's not so much a vocal or celebratory type energy, but it's the going in, making a big boom on somebody that gets that defense energized. And that's what he brings every time he plays. And, as you can tell, big Daniel Sorensen fan. So Tommy, thank you. Appreciate that intro.
And it's not like you and I are just making up his abilities. I mean, he's had 3 interceptions on the season. He intercepted Josh Allen late in the game during the Bills game back in week 6. He intercepted Drew Lock in week 7 against the Broncos and returned it. It was a pick 6 in that game against the Broncos. And then Sunday Night Football against the Raiders, he had another interception against Derek Carr late in the game. So yeah, he's a ball hawk, especially in crucial moments. And having a guy like him and Tyrann Mathieu in the game, they're just always going to try to find where the big play is and try to make it. And I don't know if I've got a more favorite guy on the defense for Kansas City than Tyrann Mathieu, and just his energy, his personality, the way he plays the game. I'll admit, and maybe we've talked about this on this show before, I was a little iffy about Tyrann Mathieu originally coming to Kansas City, but I think he's solidified himself as kind of the spiritual leader of that defense, especially the spiritual leader in the secondary. He's the veteran presence, back there, and he just does a great job week in and week out.
Yeah, I think they're the perfect combination at Sorensen and Mathieu. And I think that's why you've actually seen Juan Thornhill play a little less, who's incredibly talented and had success. I think Steve Spagnuolo has just found this combination of Sorensen and Mathieu working so well together. As Mathieu can obviously come up and make a big hit and those kind of things as well, but he's got much more coverage skills, where Dan's more in the box against the run game, and they can both do. Obviously, Matthew can do both. He's world-class talent, but it just is a real good combination, and I think the reason both of these guys pair well too, and I think this is something fans need to understand, sometimes, not sometimes, a lot of times, getting those turnover plays is not always, it's not being in the right place at the right time. A lot of times it takes a gamble. It takes taking a risk that I can get to that ball with the chance that if I don't, the play breaks, right? So you're going to have times, and you don't really see it out of Matthew, but he is maybe the best safety in the game right now. But you see that out of Sorensen, and he gets beat because he's not as fast as some of the guys. But he takes chances, and that is going to cost you at times. But that is the perfect combination when you have a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes. I'd much rather have my secondary get beat over the top every now and then, if that means that they're going to risk and be able to steal one or two possessions because they pick off a ball that they took a chance on. Getting Patrick Mahomes one or two extra possessions a game is going to win you football games every time. You're not going to be able to outscore the Chiefs if that's the case. So I think they pair well. And I'm a homer. Everybody knows that. Nobody's listening to this podcast that doesn't. But that's, I feel like I'm bringing some sound logic to why I really love those two. And the pass rush looked better, Tommy. It still wasn't as dominant as we'd like to see. We still didn't see a ton out of Frank Clark. Chris Jones was disruptive, and they mentioned some stats during the game, and I don't have them in front of me, but I do remember thinking, oh wow, he's actually had a better season from a pass rush standpoint than I think Tommy and I were giving him credit for, or we're just recognizing anyways. And I think you and I both have kind of said, hey, look, those two, they've got to do more, and that's still maybe a valid argument, right? But I think the numbers for Chris Jones have been a little bit better than maybe what the eye sees, and it's not a sack number, but as long as you're disrupting the pass game, that's the important thing.
Well, and I think that you can, I don't want to say you can give a break to Chris Jones and Frank Clark right now because you want them to perform all the time, but they need to perform in the playoffs, so right. A game against the Broncos, yeah, it's important. Every game is important, but I need to see them show up starting now, the last 4 games of the regular season and then into the playoffs. And that's really where we saw Frank Clark start to shine last year, also when he really came around and had a really strong playoff run for Kansas City. But that again shows the importance of having guys like Tyrann Mathieu and Daniel Sorensen in the secondary when the pass rush is not 100% there. When they're not playing at the top of their game, it means that they're not going to be able to get to the quarterback as much. And so you absolutely need to have the secondary step up. And we saw that Sunday against Denver as the Chiefs got the victory. The next game is not going to be as easy. It wasn't easy on Sunday, but the Miami Dolphins are a good football team. The Chiefs travel to sunny Miami on Sunday. It's going to be kind of weird to have a noon game, a noon kickoff. We haven't had a noon kickoff in quite a while. It seems like it's either the late afternoon game or the Sunday night game for Kansas City, but they're back playing at 12 noon on the road in Miami. The Dolphins are 8-4 on the season. Tua Tagovailoa has taken over as quarterback from Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's led the Dolphins to some wins. Fitzpatrick was able to do the same thing. So it really hasn't mattered that much who the quarterback is right now for the Dolphins crew. They're setting in an 8-4 record and challenging the Buffalo Bills for that first place spot in the AFC East. Your predictions on the Chiefs and Dolphins on Sunday afternoon?
Well, my predictions have been very, very wrong every time I've made a prediction. So, at this point, I think the Chiefs kind of bounce back.
I'm just
might
saying.
As well get that horn ready. That's right. I'm going to go 35 again. I went 35 last week, but I feel like, again, law of averages. The Chiefs they're going to put up some numbers. They got to keep that total high. But this time I'll go ahead and say Dolphins 35-17. I think they're a great defense, but I really think the Chiefs just look for an explosive bounce back. Xavier Howard for the Dolphins got kicked out of last week's game. The replays were very weird about it. There was a fight with Tyler Boyd, and it didn't look like really anything happened. So, but they got kicked out. He got kicked out for punches thrown. So whether he gets suspended or not, I haven't seen anything about. You would certainly kind of expect that to come down after punches being thrown. But when you watched the replay last week, it kind of looked pretty harmless from both players. So unless we miss something, it'll be very curious because he's their best corner. So that will obviously have a big impact on their defensive abilities to slow down Tyreek Hill and Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, and it wasn't just that play with Tyler Boyd and Xavier Howard. That there were bench clearing brawls in that game against.
I missed that.
Yeah, there were a couple fair catch calls that the Dolphins, they were calling for a fair catch on a punt, and I don't know who it was for Cincinnati, but just laid the returner out both times. And Brian Flores was on the field getting in the face of the guy from Cincinnati. It was benches cleared. It was not a pretty sight in that last game. Hopefully it won't be nearly as dramatic this week against Kansas City. So my prediction, I keep inching my score total for Kansas City down week in and week out after I have them scoring a bunch of points, and it just really doesn't happen that way. So I'm going to actually inch it down again. I know that the Chiefs really want to get back on the right side of the offense and really start to score some touchdowns on Sunday. But I do think that the Dolphins have a really good defense. In fact, not to talk about a lot about my fantasy team, but I think I've got Miami in like several different leagues because they're so strong. So I'm going to say the Chiefs put up 28. And I'm gonna match your total for the Dolphins and say 17. So you're saying 35-17. I'm saying 28-17 for Kansas City on Sunday against the Dolphins. But regardless, it should be a really fun matchup of a traditionally really high-powered offense and a really strong defense in Miami. I'm looking forward to this one.
Also, I'm as bad at predicting these games as KU is at playing football. So I don't, I'm not sure why you keep asking me for the scores because I've just been so wrong. I mean, I guess I've gotten the correct win, 11 times, but other than that, they've just been bad, I think.
Yeah, you're picking the right team to win, but the score just is a little bit off. Just not quite there, but we'll see how that game pans out on Sunday for the Chiefs and the Dolphins. Let's get into college basketball now, and we're going to start with KU. And just a couple of hours from when we're recording this, the Kansas Jayhawks get a huge victory inside Allen Fieldhouse as the number 5 ranked Kansas Jayhawks take down the number 8 ranked Creighton Bluejays. It was a tight game. Final score in this one, 73-72. And it came right down to the wire. Marcus Zagorowski for the Blue Jays had a chance to tie the game with 3 free throws with 1.1 seconds to go. He made the first 2. He missed the third one. And the Jayhawks hang on inside Allen Fieldhouse. Final score, 73-72. Again, it moves the Jayhawks to 5-1 on the season. Your thoughts on the Jayhawks taking down Creighton in Lawrence on Tuesday?
Yeah, that's a good win. Number 8 Creighton, I think they're a lot. I mean, obviously you see number 8 on there, you're going to know that they're a good team, but I think Creighton's been a good basketball team for a while. I think it's still taken America a long time to shake this isn't Missouri Valley Creighton, which was good, but was a mid-major. Like, they're a Big East. They're a very, very good basketball team this year. So that's a good win anytime you can beat that quality of opponent. And again, as I continue to watch them play, Kansas, that is, I just keep thinking we're still just looking for the guy. I feel like that's when they find that guy, that's going to help take things off, because there just seems just to be a lack of, urgency, or I can't find the right word, but just nobody to really take charge when we go through these dips, and they're playing good basketball, so it hasn't really hurt them per se. But when we kind of go through these dips or spurts where, maybe it's a 7-2 run the other way, who that guy is to just really step up and score 4 to 6 points in a row. We just haven't seen that particularly out of any one person, right? We've seen a couple different guys do it, but we just haven't really seen anyone become the guy. And I know people are probably tired of me talking about that, but it just kind of felt like more of the same watching Kansas play Creighton.
I think that Jalen Wilson might want to argue that point a little bit, because I think if anyone has been the guy, it's been Jalen Wilson.
And I would agree with that. I would.
He finished the Creighton game with 23 points and 10 rebounds. He consistently has taken games over. And there was a stretch in that game against Creighton where I think Jalen Wilson had 14 straight points for Kansas or something like that. That to me, that sure sounds like a guy that can take over the game and be the guy.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. And I guess maybe it's just me as a fan processing that, he's one of the new faces on the court and you don't expect that, right? I mean,
right.
We're just so accustomed to, it seems like someone steps into that role, right? It was Frank Mason. Devontae Graham played right alongside him, and you knew when Frank Mason left, it was going to be Devontae Graham. Devontae Graham left. Now, granted, it was a freshman in Devon Dotson, but you knew what you had coming in when Dotson took over. And really that year, even when Dotson was a freshman, it was kind of a lot of that, not quite sure who the guy was. He becomes a sophomore, Devon Dotson's all of a sudden the guy, him and Azubuike. And maybe I'm just struggling with that as Jalen Wilson being a new face.
And not to try to get in your head and like try to explain on your behalf what you're trying to say, but I think maybe what you're trying to explain, correct me if I'm wrong, is you're looking for not the guy who can take over a game or score clutch points, but whose team is it, right?
Right.
Who's the leader of the team game in and game out? You always knew, like you said, Frank Mason was the leader. Devontae Graham was the leader. I think that by seniority, Marcus Garrett probably should be the leader, quote unquote, of the team. But Marcus Garrett is so understated that it's kind of hard for him. I'm just from watching him play for 4 years, he's not a super vibrant, dynamic personality like a guy like Udoka Azubuike is, who's going to pound his chest, and Devon Dotson, who's going to bring the ball up the court every time. You think of Marcus Garrett doing the dirty work. You think of him going after loose balls, playing lockdown defense. He's going to go to the rim when he needs to, but his personality is a little bit more understated. So I don't know if that's kind of what you're getting at, but as far as a guy who can take over a game and score points at will, right now it's Jalen Wilson.
Yeah, you're right. And I think I appreciate you directing that, because I think really what I'm looking for is both, right? At this level, I do feel like someone needs to really lead the team, but also that player also has to be the guy who can go get 4 to 5 points. Mitch Lightfoot may very well be the guy that really rallies those guys around in practice, gets guys where they need to go, but he's playing 6 minutes a game. He's not the guy, right? So you're exactly right. I need both. And I guess maybe that's why I'm not there with Jalen Wilson yet, even though from a talent standpoint, he's absolutely, I said it on the last podcast. I think he's the guy who's going to be, scoring the most points game in and game out. He's incredibly talented, but you just need that combination of leading the team, telling the guys, we need to stop here or stop Bill can only do stuff so much from the sideline. You got to have that on-court presence, and someone's going to take charge by the end of the year, and it may very well be Jalen Wilson grows up. And you got to remember, he is a sophomore. He was around this team last year. It's just his first year on the court because he had to sit out last year. Right. So,
and maybe part of it too, in your mind, is that, and you've mentioned this a couple different times, that if you're looking for someone to be the guy for KU, you're looking at Ochai Agbaji. And where was Ochai in that Creighton game? He was 0 for 6 on the floor, didn't score a single point. That's not going to do it if Ochai Agbaji is going to step up and be the guy. We've seen offensive production out of him early in the season, but against the number 8 team in the country, and you're going to be facing teams of that caliber in the Big 12 and in the tournament, you need Ochai to be able to score and not go 0 from the floor.
Yeah, and this has been my problem with Ochai kind of from the beginning, and not really a problem because, look, I think he has a role on the team, but there have been a lot of folks who have said, oh, he's going to take that next step. He's going to become the guy. You got to remember, this was a kid who wasn't hardly recruited out of high school, got a last-second offer from Kansas. They redshirted him as a freshman. So, I mean, that's already telling you what their expectations were of him. They removed that redshirt freshman year. Everybody remembers he comes in, he scores, I don't know, I think it was like 16 or 18 or something like that, with that redshirt off, played really well, and that caught everyone's attention. Well, there are moments when you can be hot, you can catch fire, and that's still not necessarily indicative of what your future career is going to be. I think he's incredible. Ochai kind of feels like, to me, he's going to be, at best a Pippin on this Kansas team, right? I mean, I just don't think he's ever going to find that time where he's the guy. He complements players very well because he is very versatile, right? Like he can shoot the ball, he can get to the rim, he can play defense. And I think that's why a lot of folks want him to really be that guy who takes over and scores, averages 18 a game or whatever. But I think he does that best when he is not the focus of the offense. He's doing it more in an auxiliary role, and then he just disappears at time. He just does. It just has happened throughout his 3-year career. So, I think getting consistent play out of Agbaji is key. And then we talked about it last week, so I don't know how much we want to talk about it this week, but figuring out what they're going to do with David McCormick, because again, I mean, he was 5 for 12 from the field, and he didn't shoot anything more than a 6-footer maybe. Right. It was 5 from 12. Had 7 rebounds, 13 points. There was moments where you felt like it was better, but he still just
it might just be a slow build for Big Dave, and he looked god awful at the very beginning of the season. Yeah. He didn't look god awful against Creighton. He looked awful. I mean, like it's slowly but surely, I feel like getting better for David McCormick. He did contribute 13 points. And I know that this guy is getting criticized day in and day out by Jayhawk fans, and for good reason, but he's doing everything in his power. I mean, like the guy does not lack energy, effort, playing hard. I mean, he's right there. He just has to be able to produce and be efficient and be effective. And that's just not really, it hasn't all clicked yet for David McCormick. I was prepared, Weston, to come on this podcast, and then depending on the outcome of the game today, but I was prepared to come on this podcast and not be super high on the Jayhawks. I don't know if you saw the final score of their game against North Dakota State over the weekend. They barely beat North Dakota State. I think the final score, they won by 4 inside Allen Fieldhouse against North Dakota State. It was not a good game. We saw the Champions Classic against Kentucky. That was an ugly matchup, an ugly game. And I was really concerned about what this Jayhawks squad was, after the first 5 games. I don't think that anymore, because I was really impressed with what I saw against Creighton. It wasn't a perfect outing. You're never going to have a perfect outing. But with Jalen Wilson, what he's doing offensively right now for Kansas is huge. Christian Brown added 14 points in that game. He knocked down a couple of really clutch threes. Bryce Thompson had good minutes as well for Kansas against the Blue Jays. And I think that this game can maybe tell you more about who this Kansas squad is than any of the games that we've seen so far. The Gonzaga game, the first game of the season, Kentucky, whatever. I think that Creighton, obviously they're a top 10 team. They've got a ton of talent. And I think that this sort of showed you, we don't really know who Kentucky is. We know Gonzaga is incredible. This was kind of like the first level-footed, level playing field, hardcore knockdown, drag-out fight that we've seen from the Jayhawks this year. And I was really pleased with how they responded. I don't know if I'm making any sense or just rambling, but I was really proud of the output that we saw from Kansas on Tuesday.
Yeah. The thing about the way Bill schedules or works to schedule his team, I think you're going to see every year, and we do every year, we always see a couple of losses or games that you scratch. Maybe they won, you scratch your head. But you have to keep a couple things in mind. One, this year is incredibly weird. So losing in the advantage of being in Allen Fieldhouse incredibly hurts. So North Dakota State, any of these small schools that normally come into Allen Fieldhouse and don't have a prayer, I think it's quite a bit leveled now. And then second, Bill is he prepares his team to win a Big 12, and then ultimately to win a national championship, not to win games in November and December. Right. And by that, I mean, he's playing guys right now that won't get minutes in the Big 12 because he's using this time to see what works. He's running things that he may not normally run. He's, an extra guy's getting a look at the 4 when he normally plays the 3, or at the 5 when he normally plays the 4. Those kind of things that will shake out come Big 12 play. But that otherwise maybe hurts from a competitive standpoint, or I guess from a win-loss or score total standpoint, in November and December. So you don't have to put a lot of stock in that. But I am with you though. I mean, losing to Gonzaga, giving up a lot of points, and then squeaking by North Dakota State. I kind of had my ear perked up at that too, thinking, okay, well, where's this season going? We already are playing with guys that we aren't used to, right? I mean, there's nobody here that on the roster. I mean, Garrett brings a defensive presence. So outside of that, there's not really anybody on this roster that you go, hey, I feel confident because we have this player. We don't have that this year, at least yet. We don't know yet, right? So I'm with you, but I do think early on there's just going to be some weird things as this season progresses towards the Big 12 play.
I think our biggest difference, you and me, is that I'm 100% on board the Jalen Wilson bandwagon, and you are not quite there, and that's okay. Might take a little bit of time for him to warm his way into your heart, but
for what it's worth,
the guy.
I think I told my wife he's my favorite player on this team, so I'm there from a fun to watch standpoint. I'm all in. I hope they play him at the 5 way more often than what they're doing, because I think McCormick. I think McCormick has a role. I just think it needs to be maybe limited, in what he does. It's not a Doak role. And so I like Jalen Wilson. I just want to see a little bit more for him to really just take over. And you're like, okay, this is Jalen Wilson's team. I'm just not there yet, but I'm big fan.
I think we'll get there. 2 more non-conference games for the Jayhawks before Big 12 play starts. The Jayhawks take on Omaha inside Allen Fieldhouse Friday evening, and then they're back inside the Fieldhouse Sunday afternoon at 1 p.m. as they take on Tarleton State. Here's a trivia question for you. Who's the head coach of Tarleton State? Do you know the answer to that?
No.
Former Kentucky head coach and a really good friend of Bill Self, Billy Clyde Gillespie, is the head coach of Tarleton State.
Interesting.
The guy had a bunch of scandals, and Tarleton State was the team that took a leap of faith on him, and now he's bringing his team up to Lawrence to take on the Jayhawks on Sunday afternoon. Then after that, the Jayhawks begin Big 12 play.
Do you think that's a Tarleton State as a pit stop on his way to Wichita State?
I don't know. I don't think the Shockers are going to bring in a guy that has been accused of some really scandalous things to replace a guy like Greg Martin.
Okay, fair enough.
I just don't see that happening, unfortunately. That's our update on the Kansas Jayhawks. Let's shift over to Manhattan and talk about the Kansas State Wildcats here briefly. It was not a good outing last weekend for the Wildcats as they lost to UNLV by 10. Final score of that game, 68-58. And as we're recording this, Weston, the Wildcats are actually in action back in Bramlage Coliseum against Fort Hays State. And nearing the end of the first half, obviously anything could happen, but nearing the end of the first half, Fort Hays State is leading the Wildcats right now with 2 minutes to go in the first half. The Wildcats stand at 1-3. I know that we just had a huge conversation, you and I, about the Jayhawks and about how it's so early to be able to tell what a team actually is and who they're going to be. But it's not looking good right now for the Wildcats, who again set at 1-3. They're playing Fort Hays State right now. They'll probably win the game, but now Fort Hays State has a 3-point lead and it's about halftime. Your thoughts on the Wildcats?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a long season for the Wildcat program. I don't know that there's going to be a lot to talk about. I think maybe the hot topics might come towards the end of the season. They always, I do feel like, now I have not seen the K-State start this bad in a while, but I do feel like they always kind of kick it on in Big 12 play, right? Like, not that they've been overly competitive the last 2 years, but they just seem to kind of kick it on as the season goes on. So certainly we can hope that Bruce Weber can maybe shake things out and kind of figure it out. He's got Mike McGurl scored 17 last week. So, he's going to be consistent throughout all the rest of the season, which is a building block, I think, to find some positivity later on, to win some games, knowing you've got basically a leader of the team, right? I mean, he's going to score the points. He's going to lead that group as an upperclassman. But I think it's going to be a long season. There's probably not going to be a whole lot to talk about, probably until March when I'm sure the conversations of Bruce Weber's job may very well be picking up.
We talked about it last week on the program about how this recruiting class and Bruce Weber are tied together, and the performances of each are going to dictate where the program goes and what the future holds for the Wildcats. And I do think it's really hard to be able to accurately judge who a team is when they're playing opponents like Drake and UMKC, and they're barely getting a win against UMKC. They're playing Fort Hays State. I think that you need to be able to get into conference play a little bit to really get a true idea of who your squad actually is. There are countless examples of teams that have terrible non-conference schedules, and then they get into conference play and all of a sudden they rack up a bunch of wins. It's just a different animal when you're playing teams that are in your conference rivalry games, and there's added motivation. It's a different kind of basketball. So I don't think that you take this non-conference slate right now for the Wildcats and completely write them off for the rest of the season. That being said, it's definitely a hill to climb. It's definitely going to be tougher to get behind the Wildcats and be able to forecast a successful season when we've seen what we've seen, so far. So it's going to make it tough. But I guess I'm going to choose to withhold 100% judgment until we start to have a decent, a decent look at some games in conference, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, and here's a thought that I was just sitting here thinking about. Do you know, and I don't, so I'm asking you, if the amount of fans allowed in any particular venue, is that controlled at all by the Big 12, or is it KU and obviously the county that they sit in? They're the ones controlling that, right?
Yeah, I don't think that the conference dictates that. I believe it is the individual member schools.
So this could be interesting as this plays out throughout, where we're at with this coronavirus. We all know vaccines are out. As soon as people start, people could start getting vaccinated as soon as I think next week. So talk about potentially Bramlage, right? Being in Western Kansas, obviously much more conservative, much more of a venue. A school's more conservative. The county's more conservative, where they've had a lot less restrictions on things. I'll be curious to see what kind of home court advantage Bramlage has come January, February. Some of these late Big 12 games, they may have more folks packed in there than maybe some of the more, obviously Douglas County is a little bit more, it's just more of a liberal county. It's they've been a little bit more strict on their restrictions on campus and in the town of Lawrence. Be very curious to see how this shakes out and what schools may have an advantage. Well, because some are packing their stadiums or close to, I'm realistic. I don't know that anybody will be back to completely normal, but I bet there will be some more advantages at some stadiums other than, other places in the conference. So that could be interesting to see. And I think the Wildcats may be a team that does have a slight advantage.
Yeah. I mean, as it stands right now, like I mentioned, their record is 1-3 at halftime. They are down to Fort Hays State by 6. The score right now is Fort Hays State 35, Kansas State 29, so not good right now for the Wildcats. We'll keep you posted as we record this episode if anything changes there with K-State against Fort Hays State. In Wichita, the Wichita State Shockers, they took on the Missouri Tigers on Sunday. The Tigers came into Wichita. The Shockers are still shorthanded. They were still playing without their full complement of players in this game against Quanzo Martin and the Missouri Tigers, and it showed as Missouri gets a 10-point win on the road against the Wichita State Shockers. Final score 72-62. It's really hard to judge, especially when this team has only played 2 games and they played with only 8 players. But we did talk about how when they had to pull out of that tournament right before Thanksgiving because of COVID, that it would give the Shockers extra time to practice, we thought. But unfortunately, I think really what it's showing is that Wichita State is kind of behind other programs just because they're not getting as much game experience. And there's only one more non-conference game before the conference play starts against Tulsa on the 15th. So definitely a disappointing loss at home against Missouri, but it kind of is what it is right now for the Shockers.
Yeah. the other thing too, I think we did a pretty poor job of previewing this game. I think we both said, I don't know anything about Missouri. They're 3-0 in the SEC. And I did catch an article up here in the Kansas City Star about, Mizzou kind of finding itself this season and maybe headed in the right direction. So they may be, end up being a pretty quality team. They do take on this Saturday, they take on number 6 Illinois, who's also another kind of surprise team. The guy I practice law with, he's a big Illinois fan, and I've just been dogging on him for the last 3 years, telling him, dude, Illinois is not going to be good. Like, you haven't been relevant since Bill Self left. It's over. You're not going to be able to rebound. So I think he's all over throwing that at my face. And he was telling me last year some of the guys they had, but I'm getting very far away from Wichita State. But anyways, my point being, Missouri is, I think, all said and done, could be a pretty quality team. And I don't know necessarily this will be any type of black eye or anything on Wichita State's schedule, in particularly with the fact that, they did have so many players out. And I think that's another thing too. I had said, hey, maybe this gives them more time to practice, but also you can't effectively practice, right? If you don't have all your guys being allowed to practice, that's just not, I don't know. I hadn't necessarily thought about it that way, but I think that also is probably pretty significant here. So just like you said with K-State, and not that Wichita State is in any type of panic that Kansas State is, but I'm not ready to really make any judgments on what I think about this Wichita State team. It's just too early. There's just been too much wonkiness going on with the season. And I think a couple of the games here coming up may show us a little bit more of what we could expect.
I watched a stretch of the game on Sunday. I was kind of going back and forth between the NFL games that were on, and then the Shockers were playing kind of at the same time. So I didn't watch all of the game, but I had it on for a period of time. And I believe it was early in the second half. And there are definitely flashes of some pretty significant talent that Isaac Brown has on the court for Wichita State. Alterique Gilbert looked really good, at least in the time that I watched. He finished with 13 points. Tyson Etienne and Clarence Jackson each had 14 points, and Clarence Jackson scored those 14, I believe, off the bench. At least he only played 21 minutes and scored 14 points and had 7 rebounds in that time. So he definitely was a spark for the Shockers. So yeah, definitely some good things that Isaac Brown has going on. The Shockers stand at 1-1 right now. And like I mentioned, they only have one more non-conference game before they get into the American Conference play, taking on Tulsa on Tuesday the 15th. Their final non-conference game is this Saturday afternoon in Wichita as the Oklahoma State Cowboys travel in. And not just the Oklahoma State Cowboys, Weston, but the number 1 freshman player in the country, Cade Cunningham, is coming to Wichita to play the Shockers. It does look like Wichita State will have their full complement of players back, but they've got quite a task in trying to shut down Cade Cunningham.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And really Oklahoma State, they've got they've kind of like K-State a little bit in the sense that they should have shown flashes over the last few years of playing really, really good basketball. I mean, I have not caught Oklahoma State playing this year, so I'm not sure if they have that same, streaky ability where it's moments of really good basketball followed by bad. But anytime you've got a talented player like Cade Cunningham, that's going to be a challenge in and of itself. So Wichita State defense certainly will be tested in that aspect.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it's been really interesting to, I really see what this Cade Cunningham guy can do. Highly, highly valued player coming out of Arlington, Texas for Mike Boynton's crew. And I've just been interested as a KU fan because I know that the Jayhawks are going to be facing him a couple of different times in Big 12 play. So far, in the season, he's averaging about 32 minutes a game, which is good. And he's averaging 18.5 points per game. So early on in his college career, he's showing that he can hang for sure. So the Shockers will have their hands full with Cade Cunningham on Saturday in Wichita as they take on Oklahoma State. All right, that's our college basketball roundup here on Keeper of the Games. And it's time to talk a little bit of college football. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because, really, as we've mentioned it multiple times, that, both KU and K-State football, really there's not a whole lot to play for at this point other than pride for both of those teams. We saw flashes from Kansas State early in the season, but we're getting close to wrapping up the college football season. And at least for KU football fans, it couldn't come soon enough. However, the Kansas Jayhawks almost got a win. I can't believe I'm saying that, but they almost got a win on Saturday against Texas Tech. Final score of that game was 16-13. If you follow us on Twitter, you saw the exchange that came from Weston, where you predicted a KU football victory. I thought you were drunk or sleep deprived or something. I was still right. They didn't win, but you were closer than I think a lot of people are going to give you credit for.
You know, I flipped on the game, and it was pretty quick into the first drive, I think, by Texas Tech. And I just had this feeling like, boy, they're just not here today. Like, Texas Tech just doesn't look like they have it, like they're interested in being here, you know, and that, to me, that is always the recipe how good football teams lose to not as good football teams. Because the thing about football is it's not like basketball where someone can get hot shooting threes and a team that's not as good as another can beat another, or baseball where bats can just be hot or cold and you lose games. Talent usually wins out in football. But the way that I think these upsets happen are, one, turnovers. Kansas got a couple of turnovers from Texas Tech, and two, just a lack of energy, you know, and sometimes you can't pin down why it is or how it happens or necessarily even blame a team, because I think just sometimes it can. I think the sport is just so physical, you know, that if you can't come with 100% energy, you're bound to get your butt kicked by someone who, you know, has a ton of physical talent as well, even if it's not typically as high as yours. But here's the thing. They lost. Kansas lost. They almost had it. I saw a lot of positive things out of this Kansas team, and particularly the positivity I saw was all from freshmen. Like, that, it blew me away how many freshmen they played. I mean, I've watched games throughout the whole season. I don't think either I just haven't listened enough, or maybe I think in part it's recently, but because guys have been leaving the program, there's been a little bit of COVID going on, and we're playing a whole lot more freshmen. You're seeing flashes, you know, out of these freshmen. This Amari Pesic-Hickson, running back out of Blue Springs, Missouri, looked very good. He didn't look great against Texas Tech, but it was the game before that he looked pretty good. This Luke Grimm, wide receiver, boy, he's a freshman. He had 6 for 41. I think he had 121 yards the week before. Looks like a guy that you can really build off of. Because in the Big 12, freshmen should not be able to compete from a physical standpoint. So if you're going to trot out that many freshmen, you're going to lose. It's that simple. Just from a physicality standpoint, you've got guys who have built Big 12 bodies. It's taken them 4 years to do so, that are playing in those games. These freshmen are not going to be able to come in and compete. Yes, at times you can get a quarterback to come in, or an elite skills guy, or even defensive line. You know, they're 1 in a million, those guys that come in and can compete like that right away. When you're playing a whole lot of them, you're just not going to compete. So it was exciting to see some positivity, some good plays, some flashes of ability out of these young guys that hopefully stick around with the program, don't leave, and build off and move forward. So that's my spiel on that. On the flip side, incredibly disappointed with Brett Dearman for his play calling. My wife was literally recording me because I was losing my mind at the absurdity of being out of the gun on 4th and inches, not once, not twice, but 3, and I want to cuss so bad, times, is insane. And to run zone read that got shut down on 4th and inches out of gun for a third time, in that last one to seal the game. I'm telling you, I don't have proof of this, but before that snap happened, I said to my wife, or maybe I was just saying out loud because I don't think she actually listens to me while I'm ranting during football games, but I said, if this is zone read out of gun, I'm going to lose my mind. And they literally ran zone read, and it got blown up like it did every time before. Absolutely, I do not understand. I don't know if it's Brett. I don't know if, I guess Les Miles is the head coach. I don't know what happened. The absurdity of the stupidity of that is still blowing my mind. as we talk about it right now. Tommy, that's it. That's all I got.
For a guy in Brent Dearman that has been lauded as this offensive play calling genius and savant, and like he's broken the game, like he can do all these crazy things. Certainly didn't see that. Now, some of that has to come down to the personnel that you have to be able to run the plays that you want to call. But I agree with you. Really disappointed in the play calling, and I don't really have a spiel like you do. And I'll be honest, I didn't watch the game. It was a pretty nice day, so I played golf instead because I figured that was going to be more worth my time than actually watching the game. But I will say I did follow it, and I will say that we can't kid ourselves. Had KU won that game, it really wouldn't have been KU winning the game. It would have been Texas Tech losing the game. Miles Kendrick was 17 to 29 for 102 yards passing. You're not going to win Big 12 games with that. And if you do, you shouldn't win. It's just the bottom line. There are so many holes, so many things that are broken, so many things that are more broken now than they were a year ago. So many players entering the transfer portal and leaving or opting out. I can't really blame them, but it's like every day. Like I don't even retweet them anymore because there are so many players that are leaving the program. And then with the COVID issues on top of it and the position, groups that have just been decimated by that, it's really hard to get behind it. And so there are so many, we can obviously dial down and talk about, each and every play call and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, the Jayhawks are 0-9. They have one game left, we think. Right now, it's on schedule to be played this Saturday against the Texas Longhorns, but Texas, their program is still on pause because of COVID. And so no official word what exactly is going to happen with that game on Saturday. But as of now, it is still on schedule that the Jayhawks will take on the Longhorns on Saturday. Speaking of the Longhorns, it's the same team that hung 69 points on the Wildcats on Saturday. So I guess say what you will about Kansas football. They only gave up 16 points to Texas Tech, while Kansas State got 69 hung up on them by the Longhorns. That was a rough game to follow just because obviously when you look at Kansas State Wildcat football historically, we've said it multiple times, you always focus on the defense for the Wildcats, and the defense just was not there as the Longhorns win that game 69-31 against Kansas State.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to watch this game either. But that's exactly to your point. I can't remember maybe a time ever. I wonder what's the highest point total that the Wildcats have had hung on them in the last 10 years, because 69, that is absurd. And, I don't have even any explanation for that, right? Yeah. That's just not something you've seen out of certainly not a Bill Snyder Kansas State football team. Right. And I say that with a little smirk, but I personally don't have, I think Kansas State's in good hands and with their coaching staff. I'm certainly not suggesting, even though I know you get fans every time, right? They get a little riled up, and that's always the easy place to go is to try to call out the coach, and because it's not like it was before or this and that. But I still think I've said it every week, and I know people are getting tired of hearing it, but they've still got a lot of young talent to be excited about. You're just going to go through these ups and downs, and this unfortunately is a down that's a little worse than they normally are when Kansas State is a little down. Yeah,
and it's definitely a disappointing way to end the season. The Wildcats are done now. I don't know. They're 4-6. I don't know if they're bowl eligible at 4-6. I'm not exactly sure what the eligibility looks like this year because of COVID. I know a lot of the lower tier bowl games were canceled because of that. So I would imagine that the Wildcats are not bowl bound. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know if I'm wrong. Somebody can correct me on that, but this was a team, Weston, that they were 4-1 to start the season. They beat the Jayhawks in the Sunflower Showdown 55-14. And then after that, lost their last 5 games, lost to West Virginia, lost to Oklahoma State, lost to Iowa State, lost to Baylor, and then lost to Texas. Now, the Oklahoma State and Baylor games were both very, very close, but they were blown out by West Virginia 37-10, blown out by Iowa State 45-0. And then it just kind of looked like they took their foot off the gas for this final game against the Longhorns. And really, I hate to say it, just didn't show up, and they lose that game 69-31. They end their regular season 4-6 after beginning the season 4-1, which is why I say it's a really disappointing way to end the season and in Chris Klieman's second year in Manhattan.
Yeah, absolutely. That's not the momentum you want to take into the off season as you're helping, build out into year 3 and into year 4 for Klieman, and really what's, kind of important for a program as he's now getting through all of his guys into the program. But ultimately I think at that 4-1 mark, we did talk about this, Tommy. I said, look, I don't think I could see them winning the Big 12, and in part being right. They lost Skylar Thompson. They had a freshman quarterback playing. No matter how excited you are for him, and he's shown flashes, he's still a freshman. It's the same thing I talked about with Kansas. I mean, obviously they're on a whole different level, right? But playing freshmen in the Big 12 is not going to get it done unless you are Oklahoma, maybe Texas, Oklahoma State. They're getting some of those top 20 to 25 freshmen in the nation coming in. Okay, yeah, those guys can slide in and play because they're probably going to go play in the NFL one day. Outside of those guys, you're not going to be able to compete when you're throwing freshmen in there very often. They're just not ready. They're just not ready. And maybe it's good game experience, but they're not ready to compete at a high level, I don't think. And I think that showed in it. I mean, K-State was 4 for 11 on third down, which that ultimately comes back. That falls back on the quarterback. If you're getting yourself into third down, that's, you're often throwing. He had 2 interceptions. He didn't fumble, but then another fumble. And between not being efficient on third down and turning the ball over, that's a pretty big recipe for having 69 hung on you. Yeah.
Well, and, again, like you said, there have been flashes, this season of some, pretty significant talent in Manhattan. And if Chris Klieman can keep the squad together, I think it is onwards and upwards for the Wildcat crew. But again, a disappointing way to end the season. And a quick sidebar, if the Longhorns can hang 69 on Kansas State, then that means the Kansas game on Saturday, they're going to hang an 80 burger, I think, on the Jayhawks and probably have the third string in by halftime, if that's. It's going to be pretty ugly if that game ends up being played, which it should be on Saturday between KU and the Longhorns. All right, a couple other quick news and note type deals that we want to tell you about before we get into our Wichita Whiparound and ultimately wrap up the episode. We do want to mention the Wichita Thunder. So it's been a long time since we've talked about hockey here on the program, and we're going to talk more in depth about Wichita Thunder hockey on our next episode. Again, we're going to tell you about that in just a little bit. But the Wichita Thunder hockey team announced their team schedule for the first 5 weeks of the 2020-2021 season. And so here's what it looks like. They kick off their season December 11th. So this Friday night is their first game. They'll be at Tulsa. Then they're on the road the day after Christmas at Kansas City, on New Year's Eve at Allen, and then they're back in Wichita. So Wichita will not host the Thunder until the new year, January 1st and 2nd versus Allen, and then the 5th, 8th, and 9th and the 10th versus Kansas City. So that's the first 9 games, the first 5 weeks of the Wichita Thunder schedule. And like I said, Weston, we'll have a lot more to talk about with the Thunder next week, but we definitely wanted to at least talk about that schedule. So I'm not exactly sure what that means for fans necessarily. We'll have to get more information about that. I can't imagine that fans will be allowed at least right away, but maybe when we get into January, we can start seeing more fans there to watch the Thunder in action.
Yeah, I grew up going to a lot of Thunder games. I had a cousin that I'm very close with who grew up as a hockey player, so he was even more interested in the Thunder, and I tagged along with him a lot, and I became a fan. And that's so much fun going to those games. So I certainly hope that they can, start with a certain number of fans and hopefully build up as we get further into the season. But very excited to talk next week more about the Thunder, when we're going to have someone that hopefully is a little more qualified to give some insight into the Thunder and what we should be looking for come the 2020-2021 season.
And I'll be the first to admit, I don't really know much about hockey at all. So I'll definitely defer to him. Well, again, we'll tell you more about that coming up here in just a few minutes. And then our final note to pass along, again, before we get into our Wichita Whiparound, some Kansas City Royals news as they signed veteran first baseman Carlos Santana to a two-year contract totaling $17 million. Santana is 34 years old. He was an all-star 2 years ago with the Cleveland Indians. That year, he hit 281 with 34 home runs and 93 RBIs. Had a down season this year, only batting 199, of course, during the shortened 2020 season with the Indians. But now he's coming to Kansas City. Your thoughts on Carlos Santana coming in and playing for the Royals next season?
I like the signing. I mean, frankly, I'm not sure why we would certainly care about the Royals spending the money. I mean, what if they didn't sign him? It's probably just $17 million that's just not spent, right? And it's a 2-year deal, so it's not hampering any long-term plans you have for the organization. We don't really have a first baseman really in the wings that were, that he would be stealing at bats from, because probably the first baseman of the future is Salvador Perez, as he, gets older and eventually probably eases out of the catcher spot. I mean, maybe he catches his whole career like Yadi does, but you'd think that he's got a better bat than Yadi. So you'd think he probably finds some time where he just reduces a little stress and moves down there. So I certainly like, having, Carlos Santana right here. I mean, he's a guy that from 2011 to 2019, he drew 88 plus walks every season. Something that the Royals don't ever do. They don't walk. So having a guy in the organization to really teach his approach, or even if he's not teaching, just have young guys to look at his approach and see an example of how to approach, how to be at the plate. I think that's going to be very, very huge. And frankly, again, I just think it's a low risk move. I think if it doesn't work out, it's a 2-year deal, and it's $17 million that probably wasn't going to be allocated anywhere else. So I'm not sure as a fan why you would care that the Royals spend the money. I personally like it.
And, the Royals need a good middle of the order bat also. I mean, they need a little bit more offense going into next season. Last year, they tied for the sixth worst scoring offense in the entire majors. They only hit 68 home runs in that shortened season. So definitely important to get a big bat. And obviously Santana had declined a little bit last season, but maybe he can find a new spark in Kansas City. And I thought this was kind of funny too. Carlos Santana actually played against the Royals really, really well in his career in Cleveland.
Yeah.
He hit 288 with 31 home runs and 93 RBIs in 151 games against Kansas City. So another plus is that the Royals won't have to play against him anymore because they've got him on the team. So again, like you said, a low risk move, and hopefully he can be a big contributor in that middle of the order for Kansas City next season. All right, now let's go ahead and get into our Wichita Whiparound here on Keeper of the Games. I want to get started off by talking about KSHAA. We've been talking about this for the last couple of weeks or so, as the conversation has gone back and forth about whether or not there should be fans allowed at winter sporting events around the state for high school. The fall sports, they were able to have fans, especially in the playoff time and into the state championship games and so forth. But KSHAA had announced that at least through, I believe, the end of January, there would be no fans allowed to watch winter sports. Well, there was a lot of outcry about that, and so the KSHAA Board of Directors voted on Tuesday to allow some fans back in the stands to support high school and middle school athletes. The vote was passed by a score of 54-24. So it looks like now up to 2 parents or guardians per participant's family beginning December 10th through the end of January. That means a maximum of 2 spectator tickets will be allowed to each family. So I guess what that means is that if you have siblings on the same team, you're not getting 4 tickets, you're getting 2 because it's the same family. So at the end of the day, it's not ideal, but it does look like KSHAA has listened, and now we're going to at least be allowing parents to come back in. And doesn't this just seem like deja vu, Weston? Because I feel like we were talking exactly about this when the fall sports came around, and now it's like, will they, won't they? What are they going to do? They make a decision, they go back on it, they make a compromise. It just seems like a big merry-go-round that we keep going on and off every time there's a new season of sports.
Right. You know, the only thing I'll say though, doesn't it feels a little different with KSHAA, right? Because it feels like they're meeting and listening as opposed to, it felt like it took an absolute outcry and just to even get that second meeting with US when USC 259 made their decision. You know, and so I do feel like KSHAA has been a little bit more listening, and I think I like this decision. I think that makes sense, right? I mean, you know, if you've got a gym that's got a capacity of, you know, these are probably pretty small gyms, so I'm going to say a number of 1,000, right? I mean, to have 2 parents each, tell them you got to spread out. I mean, we know, like it's been drilled into our brains now of what these numbers are. Staying 6 feet apart. You can probably put people 10 feet apart. I mean, if you've got a mom and dad that are sitting next to each other, well, that doesn't matter because they're sitting next to each other at home, you know. So I think giving the parents the opportunity, and I do think on last week's episode, I said, you know, I don't know why more parents aren't just happy that their kids get to play, you know, and I think that's true, but I also think, hey, this should always be a revolving door of information from the people making decisions to ban parents from not watching their kids play, or watching, you know, fans not watching their high school, you know, play. As we progress. So, and frankly, I think we should probably, you know, there should probably be a meeting. Well, and I guess the holidays make incredibly tough timing, because I'm sure the guys who work for KSHAA probably aren't making a ton of money. So you're probably to have them have an emergency Christmas, you know, time meeting isn't probably going to happen, but they should probably have another meeting December 20th. To see, okay, the vaccine's out. Does that change our opinion? Maybe the answer is no. I mean, it very well could be the answer is no. But we're at that point now, I think, with all of this COVID stuff, that decisions could be, a good decision can be changing from a week-to-week basis. We don't know what these next 3 to 4 weeks looks like, or, you know, 1 to 3 months even. So I think it's all going to be touch and go from here on out.
And I think you can definitely tell that KSHAA is at a point now where, you know, they want to try to avoid a lot of the backlash that they saw in the fall sports season. And, you know, I know that a lot of this was USD 259 as well, kind of in that decision-making process. But if you remember back to the football season, there were protests, you know, and people holding up signs and, you know, things like that. And so, like you mentioned, KSHAA is a little bit more willing, I think, to listen, you know, now. And, you know, I think they probably thought, okay, we're going to give it a shot. Ideally, for health purposes, we'd love to not have anybody in the stands. So we're going to try to restrict it. And if there's pushback, which I'm sure that they thought there surely will be, we'll go back on it. We'll try to make a compromise, which is what they're doing right now, with, you know, only 2 tickets per family, you know, allowed at these sporting events. But KSHAA's not the end all be all either. Local boards of education, local health departments, they can make those decisions outside of KSHAA. They can say, we're not going to give any tickets out for these games, and have it be more of at a district level, as opposed to, you know, at a state level, which is what the decision we have right now. But again, as it stands, 2 spectators per family allowed, which is an improvement from the way that the decision was originally made by KSHAA. And if things change, then we'll absolutely keep you posted on what those changes mean in the future for winter sports around the state. We are into basketball season at the high school level, and not just around the state, but in the Wichita area as well. So a couple of updates for you, just kind of cherry picking a couple of the bigger games to tell you about. So East beat Southeast in City League play, and it was an overtime game. Final score of that game, 62-57. This is notable because Clint Kinnaman is now the head coach at East High. We talked about Coach Kinnaman when he took the job back at the very beginning of our podcast, like all the way back in February. One of our first topics was about Clint Kinnaman coming in, and he was the coach at St. John's, I believe, for like 25 or 30 years out in Western Kansas or Central Kansas, and now is coaching in the City League at East, and his era is officially underway with the win. Of course, East won that game 62-57 in overtime. Any thoughts on Clint Kinnaman coming in from a rural community and now coaching East High, and his first game results in a win?
Well, that's got to feel good, right? It's just kind of like Isaac Brown at Wichita State. Getting that first one under your belt has got to feel good, and it puts you in the right direction. It's just one. He's got a long ways to go, but, I think I said this probably back when we talked about him jumping from St. John's to East. It's definitely going to be a different style of basketball that's played, and we'll see how it goes throughout the year. But what a weird year to make that transition, right? I mean, that's got to be tough, but kudos to him for getting that first win.
Wichita West beat Wichita North. Final score of that game, 59-47. Bishop Carroll beat Wichita South. It was a blowout, 67-29, as Carroll gets that victory. Mays over Dodge City, 75-35. That game wasn't even close either. And then in 5A, Augusta beat Goddard 58-51. Campus, we talked a lot about Campus and their efforts last season as the season was cut short due to COVID, and Campus had been on a roll. They get off on the right foot by taking down Salina Central. Final score of that game, 65-58. Andover beat McPherson 73-44. And then the other game that I just wanted to mention very quickly, Heights also, they took down Cape and Mount Carmel in the season opener. Final score of that game, 68-49. So just some score updates there for boys basketball in the high school ranks around the Wichita Metro. And one other final update, because I've kept this up as we've been talking, that's not in high school, it's back in college. I wanted to give you an update on the Kansas State Fort Hays State game right now, Weston. Fort Hays State leads by 13, 55-42 against the Kansas State Wildcats with 12 minutes to go in the ball game. If Fort Hays State can hold on, you'll see a D2 team knock off the Kansas State Wildcats in the Big 12.
That's going to rock the boat a little bit if Fort Hays State pulls this off. That's a big deal for old Bruce Weber if they lose to a D2 opponent. That's a big deal. It really is. And
how much money is Fort Hays State getting paid to play this game in the first place? Like, they could walk away with a big check and a win potentially.
Yeah, it's funny you say. I literally have the little tab open on mine as well. I was keeping an eye on it, so I may have to flip this. Looks like it's on ESPN Plus. I may have to flip this game on after we get off the podcast.
Yeah. So obviously we're going to be going off the air here momentarily, so we won't have a final score, which by the time this podcast drops, you'll all know whether or not Kansas State wins or loses this game. But right now it's not looking good for Bruce Weber's squad. And so that's going to wrap things up for our Wichita Whiparound here on Keeper of the Games. And actually that's going to wrap up our show for the most part. I do want to tell you, we've been teasing it all show about what we have coming up next week. On Keeper of the Games. It'll be our final episode of 2020. So while sports continue, Chiefs football, college basketball, and the like over the holidays, we're going to take some time off. Weston, you've got a brand new baby girl, and the holidays are coming up, and I'm sure the last thing you want to do is record podcasts. So we're going to take a break between the 15th and the beginning of the year. And so our final episode will drop next week, and we're going to be joined all episode long by Blake Cripps. Blake has been obviously fantastic on this program multiple times. And so we wanted to bring him on and have a 3-man crew for the podcast next week. And we're really excited about this. We're going to be welcoming on Jason Mals, who is the voice of the Wichita Thunder. He's going to break down everything going on with the Wichita Thunder season, what things are going to look like for the Thunder squad as they get ready to kick off. And actually, by the time we have him on, the Thunder will have one game under their belts as they kick off on Friday on the road. So we'll have Jason on to talk about Thunder hockey. And like I said before, Weston, I know very little about hockey. So having a guy like Jason on to give his insight will be invaluable for us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You and I have said many a times, right? Like, we much would prefer to bring on people that are much smarter, much more knowledgeable on any particular topic than we are, to let the people know what's going on. So I'm excited. I'm excited to talk a little hockey. And I'll be honest, I've kind of been out of the know with the Thunder for quite a while. And like I said, I grew up on it. So I'm excited to hear what they have going on and seeing, what's in store for 2021.
We might end up having other guests as well. We're working on that. We don't have that confirmed. We do have Jason Mouse confirmed to be on the program next week. So we're calling it our Keeper of the Games Holiday Extravaganza. It's going to be probably a longer show. I mean, we're coming up. We kind of do an hour to an hour and a half. This one might be longer because we've got, a 3-man crew to talk about all the sports topics. And then we're talking about some guests as well. So it might be an episode that will take you from next week through the end of the year to listen to all of it. And that's totally okay. If we can provide you with some content between now and when we come back, that's fine with me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for this. And like I said, I can't make any promises on other guests, but we've got a couple in mind. We've reaching out. We're trying to work on some stuff, give you some folks that are, knowledgeable in the Wichita sports world, or maybe just something you might find interesting, even if it's not, obviously sports related, but maybe not necessarily with a direct tie to the sports world of Wichita. But we just want to bring you a lot of content to get you through from the time we, record this last podcast through to the end of the year and kind of knock it out. So I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Yep, we're looking forward to that. It'll be next week. It'll be our final episode of 2020, our holiday extravaganza for Keeper of the Games. And finally, the last thing that I want to mention, I don't know if you can see this, if that's showing up. That's our fantasy football score.
It's not.
If you're watching this on YouTube, then you probably can't see that. But you and I are in the same fantasy football league together. I have had a tremendous season so far, and I just took the lead against you. I had Amari Cooper. The Cowboys game is going on right now. You're done. You have no players left, and Amari Cooper just made a catch that put me over. I'm winning by less than a point. So unless Amari Cooper fumbles the football or something, I should have a win locked up, and I should move to
no, Tommy. No, Tommy. Have you not looked at the brackets?
I've not.
See, this is on you, and I'm sure people love hearing us talk about our fantasy league. But we're in the playoffs now, so it's 2-week rounds.
That's right.
So just so the people know, and again, now that we're talking about our boring fantasy football content, Tommy beat me by 1 when I had Derrick Henry score 4.9 points. So I think Tommy needed to get out to a much bigger lead to secure that locked up for next week.
Hey, just like you said when we were talking about the Chiefs, a win is a win, right? That's really that's really all that matters. And I entered the playoffs 10-2, and your record's not anywhere.
Not good. No, I snuck in.
Yeah. So, and I do also have to mention that this is my first year in your league, and I'm dominating your league. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm dominating.
Just so people know, it's the family league. All right. It's not like he's in here with a bunch of, fantasy experts. Well, my wife has not done very well. She doesn't listen to this podcast anyways, but my wife's in there. Her team name is Puntin Spice Latte, which, tells you all you need to know, but also fairly creative. I will give
fair enough.
So,
yeah.
But that's it's the family league. But Tommy is got a hand up. He's doing well, and he's beating me in round 1 of 2 to see who moves on to the next week. So he's got to get me next week by it's a total of the 2 weeks, right?
I got to beat you by I got to beat you by 2 basically.
Yep.
And that would mean that next week on our holiday extravaganza, we should have an idea of who's moving on to the next round. So we'll have to talk about that next week. I just wanted to point that out. Hey, don't forget to hit subscribe. That way, anytime we have a brand new episode of the podcast, you'll get a notification. Again, you can listen on all major podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all the major ones right there. You can find us. You can go to our website, cogsports.com, watch full episodes on YouTube and Facebook by searching for Keeper of the Games, and follow us anytime on Twitter and Instagram at CogPod. That's at KOGPod. And don't forget, next week is our Keeper of the Games holiday extravaganza. We're looking forward to it. Weston, what is your Twitter handle?
At WMills94.
Of course, you can follow me anytime at Tweets from Tommy. Until next week, for Weston Mills, I'm Tommy Castor. You've been checking out Keeper of the Games.
Take care, guys.
You've been listening to Keeper of the Games with Tommy Castor and Weston Mills. Don't forget to subscribe, download, and listen on all major podcast platforms like iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and more. Find the podcast and videos on Facebook and YouTube at Keeper of the Games, and follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at CogPod. That's KOG Pod.